All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We are following up to some degree on our leadership development series. Dr. Hall and I had a brief discussion post episode in regards to uh, dangers of bad ideas. So we're going to talk about that today and what that looks like. So we'll introduce Dr. Hall. He is a business psychologist, executive coach, public speaker, and multi-time author. And what I like to consider is where the application piece kicks in and the neuro nerd side of things and how we actually implement the skills and the tools that he introduces us to. How you doing, today, Dr. Hall?
I am doing quite well. Thank you
Good.
for asking.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. This one's intriguing to me because this isn't a topic we've talked a lot about. Um, but in the little bit we have, I can imagine that things could go pretty sideways with poor mindsets and poor ideas.
Yeah, and I hope the content today will demonstrate the power of a bad idea, and then the converse, which is the power of a good idea, and why
Yeah.
mindset is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very good. Let's do a couple of real quick housekeeping items here. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Jared Lee. I'm the associate broker here at Team Lead at My Home Connection, also known as MHC Realty. Our sponsor for today is the Perfect Real Estate Business. We've been developing this over the last couple of decades, in large part with Dr. Hall recently introducing business, life coaching, mentoring, and training. Some of the things that we see deficient in today's real estate business, along with some of the other items that you see here on the screen. So, if you have any questions or like to see how we can help, feel free to reach out and we can have that discussion. Otherwise, I'll bring Dr. Hall back on, and um, I, as I understand it, this comes out of your help in the idea of mindset training for your leaders. Is that correct? How to train them
A-
about their mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I hope to do today is illustrate why mindset has very practical consequences. I think it's easy to look at it and say, "Oh, well, mindset's not that important." What's it going to cost? And I hope I can demonstrate with a couple global examples, but uh, th- then then tighten it in, and then you and I can maybe talk about some of the mindset issues with business owners, and in particular for your business in real estate.
Yeah.
Um,
I like the idea of going here because one of the things you talk often about is the strength coaching side of things as your
mhm.
analogy to like the sports arena where everybody has a sports or excuse me a strength coach, and then you might have a very specific coach in other areas. And for you, it's
Yes,
it's it's all in the mindset. Where do things start, and actually sometimes where do they finish? It's all in the mind, and if you don't have an appreciation for it and aren't prepared there, then you're kind of off to a poor start.
absolutely. You set yourself up for failure if you have an incorrect presupposition. And in a couple of the examples I'm going to give, you can have far-reaching implications for the health and well-being of other people.
Hmm. Now, how does this fit into, or is the monitor and manage side of things part and parcel to this? That you have to take the time to monitor what you're thinking so you can manage what you're thinking and what you're ultimately what you're doing.
Yeah, and one of the things that we very often do is we don't evaluate the content of what we believe. We'll accept someone else's ideas as true because they're an expert, or because they're a political official, or they're famous, and we won't spend the time evaluating the idea. We'll just glom onto the
Mm.
idea and then wander down this path, and we'll get ourselves into trouble. So there's a lot of common knowledge. There are basic assumptions about the world that just aren't true. And we find out later, wow, that had deadly consequences. I mean, we can go way back, and we can look at Galileo and the Catholic Church, um, you know the Catholic Church at the time said that the entire universe revolved around the Earth, and so all of astronomy was put together so that you had these very complex theories about why the planets moved the way they did. And they actually said, well, in the orbit of this planet, it does a little loop-de-loop. So it looks like it's going backwards. So it's not in a circle. As it's going through a circle, then it does a loop, and then it goes back into the circle in order to explain their observations. And Galileo said, well, if the sun is at the center, then that explains all this. And, it was a simple solution. I mean, they threatened to kill the guy because it changed their assumption about the world. And at the time, the leaders of the church couldn't integrate their belief that God created human beings and therefore we were special, therefore the earth was special, therefore it must be the center of the universe. And they couldn't say, they couldn't change it ever so slightly to God made people, we're important, the earth is important, and it's not the center of the universe. And they couldn't make that shift. Now, today, everybody knows, there are probably 11 flat earthers somewhere on the planet who don't believe it, but everybody knows that in our solar system, the sun is the center of the solar system, and the earth and the rest of the planets rotate around it in circular or elliptical orbits. I mean, and so it's pretty easy now, but we look back on that and we go, well, they were just ignorant. Well, yeah, they were ignorant, and we're ignorant now too. And even more recently, I guess I want to talk about two other ideas. And some of this is probably influenced by one of my intellectual heroes, a guy named Thomas Sowell. And he has a book called Intellectuals and Society, where he talks about how intellectuals have these really brilliant theories that just don't work out. And the theorists are very often insulated from the consequences of their ideas. And because they're experts, because they're academicians, because they're government officials, we tend to think, oh, they're right, because or their writing is so hard to understand. People go, boy, that because I don't understand it, this person must be so much smarter than me.
Yeah.
It could be because they're also a bad writer. I mean, really brilliant people know how to communicate their ideas to people who are third graders. You can tell a person who's expert at their discipline because they can explain what they do to a third grader in a way that is appropriate for the third grader. Certainly an incomplete explanation, but you get the gist of it. Yeah. And so very often people will make the assumption, and here's a dangerous presupposition, because I don't understand it, the other person must be smarter than me, as opposed to, I don't understand it, maybe this is not a good idea, or maybe this person is a bad writer, and so I should evaluate it more. Yeah. And so that can get people in trouble. So the two examples I want to use besides Galileo is Karl Marx. Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital with Engels, and in the early 20th century, it started with the Russian Revolution. And I'm not saying that the czars were, moral paragons, but what I am saying is that everywhere you look, the theories of Karl Marx have never worked out. And the advocates for communism, Marxism, say, well, it just wasn't done correctly. Well, if you experiment with as many societies and as many people as Marxism has been experimented with, and it's never worked, guess what?
It's not going to work.
It doesn't work. We've had over 100 years of failure after failure. And so Marx comes up with this idea And if you look at the consequences of communist regimes in the 20th century, communist regimes turned into totalitarian states, and they're responsible for tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of deaths. Well, who had the idea? Well, Karl Marx. Well, what we know about Karl Marx is that he died sitting in his easy chair just a few feet away from his friends. Whereas he's the theorist, he's the big idea thinker. And it's his idea that launched Marxism, and tens of millions of people died, many of them, kneeling on the edge of a ditch with a rifle barrel at the back of their head, and died with a bullet in the back of the head to fall into a ditch. The consequences of Marx's bad ideas bled out all over the world on people who weren't Karl Marx, who died peaceably in an easy chair, feet away from his friends.
Yeah.
And so that's the power of a bad idea. Marx was not a particularly good writer, and he may have had some compelling points, but they weren't well thought out. And again, my intellectual hero, Thomas Sowell, said, who was a communist, going through graduate school, got his PhD, and was an avowed Marxist. And he changed his thinking. He said, lots of people have read the Communist Manifesto, but those who fully understand it know what an empty an empty fraud it is. So that's the power of a bad idea, that one person who can spread a bad idea can infect tens of millions of people and hundreds of millions of lives, and can have consequences that never affect the theorist. So my father was an agronomist. And those of you who don't know what an agronomist is, it's the study of soils and the plants that grow in them, the study of soil and crops. And my dad's area of specialty was soil. And so growing up, I saw lots of pictures of dirt. My dad would dig ditches and take pictures
More
of
than
ditches.
most, I'm sure.
Oh,
I'm joking.
More than most. You're absolutely correct. I mean, I probably got hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of dirt in my dad's collection of photos.
I don't remember seeing any in my household, so you've clearly.
Yeah, you probably did. But I mean, I've got quite the collection. So he told me, and this was before it was widely known, that there was a guy named Lysenko, and he was an agronomist in the Soviet Union. And he believed that seeds, under Marxist principles, seeds could become stronger if you planted them in the winter. And that if you just applied Marxist principles to seeds, you could plant them in the winter and you could grow crops through the snow.
Anti-Mother Nature?
Well, guess what? He became the guy in charge of crops.
Oh no!
In the Soviet Union, and there was a famine that was widely suppressed called Holodomor, and it mostly affected the part of the Soviet Union that is now Ukraine, and it killed millions of people through starvation. Because Lysenko said, we can grow crops in the winter and they'll just get stronger. And then next year they'll even be stronger. And so let's keep planting them in the ice.
Wow.
And all of these people died because of his bad idea. And even after these people died, Mao thought it was such a good idea that he then introduced it to China. And so China then began to take on Lysenko's ideas that that seeds would get stronger if you just planted them in the winter.
With no
And so,
evidence and total evidence of failure, but no evidence of success.
right, but it's a great theory, right? And the theorist never had the consequences of his actions. But all the people who starved to death in the Ukraine, they are the ones who took the consequence of this bad idea.
Yeah.
And so when I work with individuals, business owners, entrepreneurs, they have these presuppositions, these ideas about how the world works. And if the world doesn't really work that way, they'll persist with their bad idea. So I'll give an example with my daughter. She was about 8 or 9 years old. And we were talking about fire safety in the house. And her bedroom was on the second floor. And I said, so if a fire breaks out in the house, what would you do? Because I wanted her to mentally rehearse what she'd do. And she said, well, I would come out my door and then I'd run down the stairs and run out the front door. I said, that's a great idea. Fantastic. What if the fire is down by the front door? She said, well, then I would jump. Oh, we had a little opening into the living room from the upper hallway. She said, I'd jump down from the second floor onto the couch because she'd done that before. And then I'd run out the back door. I said, that's a great idea. What if the whole downstairs is on fire? Mm-hmm. And she said, I guess I'd just go back into my room. And I said, what about your window? And she said, well, I'd have to break the screen.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. And she said, well, and I go, do you see what her little mind was? I'll get in trouble if I break the screen. So in her 9-year-old mind, she had this idea that she would be trapped in her room because she wasn't allowed to break the screen. And I said, you are absolutely supposed to break the screen in a situation like that. And she says, oh, okay. And she says, but I might get hurt jumping down. I said, you just told me 2 minutes ago you jumped down into the living room. It's only 3 feet further. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Oh. And do you see what happened?
Yeah.
Is she had a bad idea that she couldn't risk breaking a screen because she'd get in trouble. Because, I don't like my kids breaking screens. But if the house is on fire, absolutely, you can break windows, you can break screens, you can cut through the walls. I don't care.
All bets are off. Yeah.
All bets are off. But her ideas would have limited her. And if you know anything about firefighting, they usually find children, hiding under their beds, dying from smoke inhalation.
Oh, wow.
And so these children have these assumptions about the world. Oh, I can't do that because I'll get in trouble. Well, the same is true for us as adults. We could save lives. We could improve all kinds of performance if we just correct these bad ideas. And so my whole life is helping people change their mindset, change their basic assumptions about the world. I call them presuppositions. And if they examine those presuppositions, the assumptions that they have, they can have a better life. Some people are self-defeating in who are business owners. They believe that money is bad. I worked with a person in the financial services industry, and he said, I don't want to work with those people who, they have all kind of those rich people because rich people are bad. And I said, isn't it your job to help people save their money so that they have ample amounts of money that they can retire on? He said, yeah.
Rich?
And I said, aren't you supposed to make them rich? Uh-huh. And he said, what's different than that? And I said, well, your assumption is that you're going to turn them into people that you hate.
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to help your business very much. So here he had an assumption about what people who are wealthy are like. and he didn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in the business of helping people generate wealth. It's not going to work.
Right.
You know,
Going to be
in your
successful.
business, if you think home ownership is a bad idea, then you probably want to get out of that business.
Right.
But I guarantee you, somewhere in the United States, there's at least one realtor who believes home ownership is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? That's going to have consequences on their own life, but on all the lives of the people who hire that realtor to help them.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing two major flaws. One is if you're taking shortcuts, meaning you're just going to assume that the expert's the expert and they're always right, so don't challenge that. That's not a good place to be, because everybody's an expert until they're not, right? Which we see that all the time, right? Eggs are bad, eggs are good. You know, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Like it's always changing. There's always some reason why something we thought 5, 10, 20 years ago is a good idea is a bad idea, and vice versa. So that's one. And then the other is, what are our presuppositions about what we think is it accurate, is it not, which is difficult to challenge because it takes time, effort, and energy.
Right. It requires that you question yourself and you question the people who are telling you things and evaluate it. We'll go back to nutrition. It turns out that everything your grandmother and your great-grandmother told you to eat is probably better for you than what the government has told you should eat. Yeah. You know, eggs, lard is okay. You know, your great-grandmother made the kids take castor oil, which tastes awful, but turns out the castor oil is really good for you. You know, so all these things that we used to think, grandma and great-grandma were wrong. No, they weren't. And there's some thinking that traditions are essentially shortcuts to help you avoid societal problems. That these are long-standing habits that have worked. And before you throw out the tradition, it might be worth examining.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a reason why.
Yeah.
How's that go? We respected our elders because there was wisdom there.
Right. And you know, they're old fools as well as young fools. And so, but again, it's a truism. It's not true in every case, but it's true enough to be worth paying attention to.
Yeah. Well, in everything we're describing, your STOP acronym, right, applies, right? Literally stop, think, observe, and plan.
Observe, plan.
So
Yep.
once you get into that habit, you can apply that mental mindset, the monitor and manage side of things to everything, because you get very good at it, because you do take that instant, that moment to challenge that. I'm like, I've heard that. And instead of just taking the easy path, let me challenge that for a sec, specifically in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great example of the work that I do, is getting people to monitor and manage their thinking. You can't change your mind until you recognize the path you're on. You know, one of the things you said is, you know, we bow down to experts. Well, all of those people in Ukraine who bowed down to the expert of Lysenko, I mean, it cost, I think, somewhere north of 5 million lives through starvation, which is a really bad way to die.
Could somebody along the way have said, I don't believe this expert. I actually believe that this could be life-threatening, and I'm going to challenge him. Clearly, that didn't happen prior to.
Well, you were also in a totalitarian Soviet state at the time. Yeah.
Right.
But I think it doesn't take long for people to look around and say, oh, okay, there are people who've gone against the grain a lot of times, and even in recent history, and it's worth paying attention to the people who've said, I'm not sure that really works. Yeah. that doesn't seem to fit with what I know. Let's at least not become dogmatic about it. Let's
Yeah.
let's examine it.
Yeah. Well, I like that you're getting in front of the action, right? Because if you say, hey, that didn't work, the outcome was very poor, then, well, yeah, obvious, duh, here's the results. But
Yeah.
if you instill the idea that even a small idea that seems potentially logical could be, hurtful, life threatening,
Yeah.
dangerous, then you need to analyze that. I'm sure as he was talking about these seeds and mapping it out, you know, he
Well,
instilled.
yeah. I mean, we can go to real estate back in 2007. I mean, the conventional wisdom was um, house prices will never go down. It's the safest investment you can ever make until 2008, 2009, and people walked away from their mortgages because, and the house values went down, and people got over their skis and owed more on their house than their house was worth. And it's like, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Well, that was a conventional wisdom that turned out not to be true.
Well, that's a super powerful one to think about because historically, and we speak to this all the time, any amount of time it does correct, and that is
It
accurate.
does.
But
Yeah,
if you
and that
take
did correct. Yeah.
yeah, but so it's a correct statement there. But if you take a slice of time and you show the opposite of that, it contradicts or flies in the face of an overarching true statement.
Right.
But you need to understand that if you're in that slice and how it affects you, then take that into consideration and say maybe some of the things that we're doing that seem ill-advised, like lending sub to sub approving subprime loans to the
Right.
degree at which you do, might have some ramifications. It's
And,
not
and
just did the value go up or not, but will the homeowner stay in the home? And if they
right.
don't, at what degree does that impact everybody else?
Yeah, I think one of the assumptions is that if people buy homes, they become responsible citizens.
Right. We had an episode,
It,
myself and a lender, just the other day about that. It's like, here's the mindset shift that you have to make once
right.
you,
It may be that responsible citizens buy homes,
yeah.
and that the tail doesn't wag the dog.
Yeah. And now, we have lenders and the policies and the practices. Responsible people are allowed to buy a home because we don't ever want irresponsible people buying certainly too many homes, because once that
Yep.
happens, we've seen, what issues and damage that causes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's worth always questioning your assumptions about what's happening in the world, and that um, what you've always believed may not be true. But in traditions, there are very often shortcuts to keep you from getting in trouble. One of the apocryphal stories, and I think it's true, is that in Japan, that it was carved in a rock that the if if the sea, if the tide goes out so far, then you must get above the height of this stone to be safe,
Hmm.
because they were saying this is how high the tsunami wave went,
Whoa.
and they carved it in rock that said if the tide goes out a certain distance, then you must be above this rock for safety.
If you're seeing
And
this, danger.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and we now have video of people who are out like collecting shells when the tide went out prior to a tsunami, and then they got killed.
Yowza.
You know, because they didn't know and hadn't gotten those traditions.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about leadership development, and there's been a lot of wisdom that we've talked about, but I think this one is super unique, at least in the degree in which we're talking about challenging worldviews, presuppositions, experts, known things. Um, because I just think that's what really good leaders do, right? We've talked about how, good leaders, people that, have good incomes, so they solve big problems.
Yeah.
You know, Now if you solve big problems, I'm pretty sure the majority of the time, the bigger the problem, the more knowns you've challenged. It
I'm
would
not
be
sure I'm
my
following you. Tell me what you mean by that. I think I want to make sure I fully understand.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a category of a good leader. Took the things that made sense and worked and implemented them really well, and all the things we've talked about. But there's also a subset of leaders that kind of threw out all of the experts, quotes and things that were to be known, and said, I've got to start from scratch because uh, uh, to solve this problem, I need to think out of the box. Well, when you think out of the box, you're throwing out, right, the knowns.
You're throwing out the knowns, and there's time for creativity. There's absolutely time for creativity, um, but there's always some foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're coming up with a creative solution, you're basing it on something. Very often, the scientists, the engineers, what do they base it on? They base it on math. Well, okay, that's pretty solid, and until you start questioning, you know, does 2 + 2 = 4? Well, then you start questioning that, then you're shaking the whole foundation for everything.
Right.
So you're anytime somebody's creative, what they're doing is they're mixing together established established tools to come up with a new solution.
Yeah.
They're not throwing out math.
Right. Well, I think this leads back kind of full circle, and because we will need to wind down here, but I like this analogy or comparison. But if you have communism or Marxism, you know, the great American experiment, right? Capitalism, democracy. There are folks that want to throw that whole concept, the baby out with the bathwater, and start new because it's fundamentally flawed and it's got some big issues, which is interesting. They want to go try something that's been proven to not only be wrong, but genocidal wrong,
Mm-hmm.
um, to try something new. Anyway, I'm just saying. I hear what you're saying. Like, take the things that you know to be true, but question everything just shy of that.
Um, I think it's good. I think it's good to question, but recognize that you don't throw everything out. And maybe the contrast that we'll use to close is the contrast between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, they said we're going to throw out the whole concept of God. We're going to take over the property of the Catholic Church, and we're going to use the mortgages, the notes on all of the property of all of the church property, and that will be our currency. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No,
Yeah. And we are going to change from a 7-day week to a 5-day week. And we're going to go from 24-hour days to 25-hour days.
okay.
They went about changing everything. And the American Revolution said, we just want you to leave us alone. And we're not gonna get rid of some basic truths like how many days in the week there are and how many months in the year and how many hours in the day. We're going to build our society on some long-standing traditions, and we're just going to be different than England. And what we see is the American Revolution created something that was really productive. The French Revolution created the guillotine, and lots and lots of people. It was the killing fields. It was as bad as the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia and Pol Pot in the way they killed people in France, just the way he did in the killing fields of Cambodia. So it was a very different thing because they threw out all truth.
Yeah.
So we can be creative, we can change things, but there are some basics that you just don't want to get rid of.
Yeah. So to totally land the plane here, the mindset of a leader, just to be concise, and you're going to correct me because I'm just trying to recap everything we talked about, is challenge certainly your presuppositions and your worldviews because you don't know where you got them from. Incorporate things that are to a high degree of likelihood logical and of certainty, but analyze everything to formulate a plan.
Yes. I mean, question yourself, recognize there are some truths that withstand the test of time. Things that have lasted a long time, there's something about them. There's something we can learn from those.
Like what grandma says, why is grandma?
Like,
Everybody's
yeah, I
grandma
mean,
for generations
everybody's,
back.
yeah, everybody's great grandma or grandma, depending on how old you are, had something important to say. I'm sure she said some ridiculous things as well, but there were kernels of truth that have lasted through time that are worth listening to her.
Yeah, love it, love it. That's a great place. What grandma said, take it to heart. But
Take it to heart. Yeah.
so just to wrap things up, Dr. Hall, what are the best ways to get a hold of you and your resources?
Yeah, you get a hold of me at my website, drrogerhall.com, drrogerhall.com. And there you can find my books, Staying Happy, Being Productive, Expedition, and DIY Brain. I've got a new one that I'm in the middle of writing called DIY Leader Brain. And I'm excited that just recently the Expedition is now available on Amazon, as all the other books are. And I found something out really cool, Jared, that if you have premium Spotify, you can get Staying Happy and DIY Brain as part of your subscription on the Audible book.
Yeah,
so
cool.
if you're a Spotify premium listener, those are available for free to you on Spotify.
That's great. That's great. All right. Well, again, Dr. Hall, great stuff. A lot of great insight, a lot of valuable information. And we appreciate your time. And other than that, we'll just wish everybody a blessed one. Take care.
Thank you.